It's Ken and me together in a podcast. Part of the Undefined with Senor Ken Wheeler. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. Also sponsor us if you do that too. My name is Jared Palmer, as I just mentioned, and I'm the lead engineer at the Palmer Group. We're a strategy, design, and engineering firm, but I'm also a professional meme lord. So like, this is one of my favorite ones that I did recently, so let's just watch some memes. Oh, do we not have sound? It's not as funny without sound, but do we have sound? I guess not. All right. So anyways, this shit's fun. Like, way better. Whoops. And then, yeah, so I run an agency, Palmer Group. We build stuff. It's really hard. A lot of the front-end stuff that we do is with React. And in doing all of that jazz, I pump out a lot of open source projects. Some of my open source projects. We're going to be talking about Formik today, but the other ones that are cool that you may have not heard of, TSDX, if you're building a new TypeScript library, check it out. Razzle's like Next.js, but works with React Router, and Backpack is a build system for like Lambdas and stuff. And the platform was a joke. Anyways, let's get back to the main event here, forms. So forms suck, like straight up horrendous. But they actually, I was reading this the other day, they were included very early on in the HTML like history. Like within a year, they had an input component. And so they're a very primitive part of the internet, and yet they suck super hard. And React doesn't make them any easier. How many people here like write a form in React every day at their day job? Okay, so like so you know this pain. This pain is like acute, right? It just sucks. So forms are still pretty hard. And let's like tell a little story here. So back in like 2017, I was building this large administrative dashboard for one of our clients, and it was going to have a ridiculous amount of forms, like 30, 40, 50 custom forms. We realized very early on that using like configuration-based stuff with like JSON schema, that wasn't going to work. Like we needed all the power of React and JSX for business logic, and we need to utilize all of that. We also like it was sort of that time and place where everything was Redux, but a small portion of the React community was like, wait a minute, this isn't a great idea. What if we just use React? So we were part of that like early movement away from Redux. And so this app I was building actually didn't have Redux in it yet. And so I was looking for a form solution. At the time, Redux form was the shit. It was the real deal. And I was just looking around and didn't see anything better. So I was like, what if I built something? So as I began to sit down, like why, like first principles, why do forms suck? It's because this is the documentation for forms in React, right? It's literally this one slide. They tell you, okay, here's like an input, and you set state on this like weird event thing, and then it wires it up in some controlled way. And if you have like two inputs, you like do this thing with the ES6 computed property, and now you can share one handler across two inputs. And that works, and React is, React's good at a lot of things, and forms just aren't one of them. But like, there's more complicated things. You were talking about like first principles. What does a form helper have to do, right? Like, what does form helper do? It's literally gotta do a couple things. It's gotta wire up state. You have to deal with validation. You have to deal with error messages. You have to deal with testing. You deal with focus management. Like all this stuff, like you need to do if you're building a complex form in React, and it does none of it for you, right? So these are like the first principles of what does this like helper need to do. And so it started actually like straight up. Formik was completely plagiarized by this like tiny component that I found in an example of Brent Jackson's repo, and it was called with form, and it was 16 lines long, and I just started this little higher order component called with form, and it sort of grew and grew and grew. Found some validation library that I liked, slapped that in there, rewrote it a couple times, and then open sourced it. And then, I guess 2 years later, Formik, we just passed our 20 millionth download, so that's pretty rad. We're at 580,000 a week. Notable Formik users are pretty awesome companies couple startups here and there. And we stayed true to our goals. And those goals are as follows. First, give back render control. And what that means is, I don't really care how you render like your inputs and stuff. Like that doesn't matter to Formik, and it should never matter to Formik. That's important because it empowers you, the developer, to get creative, and it also means that Formik should only focus on the logic. The next is to only solve for 80% of use cases. And this is huge. This isn't a feature, not a bug. Formik is not trying to work with every single form in every single application. It is meant for 80% of them. And very much so, I've said this many times in many issues, Formik's just not a use case that Formik's like interested in covering or worried about. What that means is that it kicks ass for those 80% of use cases. It also must come with the battery pack included, which means like you're not going to install 75 different packages. Like it should just work out of the box. It also needed to be incrementally adoptable. Nobody wants to rewrite their forms, right? That's terrible. So Formik's always been designed so that your next form can be a Formik form, but the one after that doesn't have to be, or maybe it is. It's completely incrementally adoptable, just like React. And the last one is no magic. So Formik doesn't use observables or anything like that. It really just stays true to just React. So to summarize, in practice, Formik doesn't have external state management, no Redux, no MobX. It doesn't use subscriptions or observables. It doesn't reinvent the wheel. And ultimately, that results in happier developers and happier forms. But the biggest thing that I've seen over the past few years that has, I think, the greatest impact on Formik's success is that it just uses React. And I know that sounds like not that crazy, right? Like it's just it's a React component. Of course, it just uses React. But it's super sweet because when React, like yesterday, comes out with all these performance improvements or new features, Formik just gets to take advantage of them. And when React gets faster, Formik gets faster. And when you're trying to help people, or you're trying to debug issues, or just trying to solve problems, so often there's the case where a developer will come and ask, like, I don't know how to do this, or Formik doesn't do this. And I'll be like, well, how would you do it without Formik, with just React? And they will think it through and ultimately come up and understand that perhaps their initial issue wasn't with Formik, but rather just React itself, or their lack of understanding or something like that. So this technique was like very much popularized by React Router, which is just ship components and don't do anything other than that. So what I want to show you now is Formik from scratch. And this is to give you a sense of how Formik works internally. And then what we're going to do is we're going to show you some of the newest features that I'm going to release today, which is along with Formik 2.0. So we're going to build Formik from scratch with hooks, and then in about like 10 minutes or so, and then we'll show off some new features. So what we have here is a simple name, email, sign-up form. And can we see this? Is this good? Okay, this is a bit awkward to type on, so I may need to hunch. Hunchback. All right, so we have an app. It's got name, set name, email, set email. It's got two change handlers, just like we showed. It has handle submit. And here you go, we wired everything up. And who here has written a form like this one? Every single person, right? Like this, I actually copied like straight from the React docs, right? Now this works great, but as I mentioned before, it doesn't cover those major points that we need when we have complex forms. We have error messages, validation, tracking like which fields have been visited, even just like co-locating everything. It doesn't really do that, right? Because if I go to make another form in this app, let's just say, I'd have to copy all of this code, right? That would be unique to that form. That would be like each form would be a snowflake. But if you think more deeply about both like all of these handlers, they actually have little to do with what's being rendered. And that's the key insight that Formik made, which is that this stuff has absolutely nothing to do with this stuff, believe it or not. So what that means, and you know, in computer science, you want to group things that change together, and they separate things that don't change together. And so why don't we just abstract this into its own little hook called useFormik? So let's do that right now. So let's make a thing called useFormik, and this is going to be a custom hook. Let's take some props, and we'll make a function called, handle change. Seems like a good name for it, right? And that'll take an event. Or let's do a name, and then an event. And it's going to persist this event. Don't worry if you've never done this. It's like some random weird stuff that happens with React. And we're going to have some values that's going to be important, right? Because you got name and set name, right? So let's do values and set values. We'll do use state. And this will be props.initial values. And this handle change function, all this thing's going to do is update values. And the way we're going to model our values is we're basically going to keep all our values in one object, and it's going to be called values. So we're going to use a state updater here, so we'll do prev. We'll spread that. And we'll use our ES6 computed property, say name, and we'll say event.target.value. And because I'm a shmeeb, cool. And now let's return values and handle change. And instead of having these handle change name and handle change email and all this nonsense, let's call useFormik. And we'll call this values and handle change. This is a lot easier at TypeScript. Email, empty string, or is it name, email? Name, email. So now we just lifted our state up, right? But we now need to wire it back down to our actual inputs, right? So instead of this being value equals name, it's going to be values.name and values.email. And instead of handle change name, it'll be, because we curried it, handle change name change that guy, and we'll copy that down here to email. Whoa. Prettier going ham. Email is not defined. In line 24. What did I do? Value. Values. Oh, this name. Oh, I did not. No, that's defined there. What? Anyway, just some. Oh, I see. Thank you. Gosh. Thanks. Sorry. Okay, so moving forward. So this all works. Dope. We can grab this json.stringify here. I'll make a little debugger here. So we can see this is all updating. All nice. Sweet. So this handle submit, we can do the same thing. This has nothing to do with the form itself. So if we just added on submit, or handle submit, to our useFormik function, or useFormik hook, too many things in the React API, what we can do is just call props.onSubmit if it exists, and pass it values, right? Let's get rid of this sleep. And then we'll call we'll pass down handle submit. so that we could use it in our form. And then let's pass in an onSubmit function here. Values. And then let's, what do I do? Here we go. Let's move this up here. And now we can delete our handle submit from our app. Right, so we've just abstracted, let's await this. We've just abstracted that aspect of our forms, right? The parts that had really nothing to do with our actual rendering. And so that's what Formik is doing. It's taking all of your logic and it's abstracting it into a set of helper components. We've written one of them, or part of one of them, a very simplified version called useFormik. But the real Formik is basically an expansion of this. But the key difference is that it's going to track errors, and it's going to have validation, and it's going to have it's going to handle submission as well, just like we did, but in a more nuanced way. And it's going to help with like array values and other things like that. But the gist of how Formik works is very similar to like if we did the following. So instead of values, imagine you had like errors, and that's how it's actually modeled identically. So let's switch things up now and talk about like real Formik. So with real Formik, in addition to passing and giving you back like handle change and values, which you could then like pass down to your inputs, Formik actually gives you some convenience methods that are and components that make life a little bit easier. And the first two of those are form and field. And all this is doing is field is rendering an input and basically using the name, basically like we did on our form before, right? We use the name here, we handle change name. And this is what field is doing. It's just going to render that input. But it's even more powerful than that. So this is a basic example. And if we look at the little debugger that I built, can we see that? Yeah, you can see we got values, we've got errors, we've got touched, is submitting, is validating, the number of times it's been submitted, tons of stuff. It's very useful if you're building a form. And so field is just, again, an input. And if I were to use a render prop here, I could get like handle change out of this, values, errors. And I could have done the same exact thing from our other form that we built. But field is just a nice, easy way to stay concise, which is really important when you're pumping out a ton of forms. But field has some sort of shortcomings, right? It accepts a render prop, which is cool. So let's show how that would work. Oh, sorry, so like field, you can create your own custom components, but let's see, sorry. That's basic for a second. So like field could take a render prop. So it would be like field, form, and you might spread this on an input. This is going to be equivalent. Same. But maybe we put a div there. Maybe you want to put your error message there. There's tons of stuff you might want to do with a custom input. You might want to, so it'd be like, just to show you that this is different. So we have like name, right? So field accepts a render prop. And render props are okay, but we have hooks now. So with the release of Formik 2, which I'm about to release in a second, and push it live, sweet. Now Storybook Hot reloads? Phenomenal. So field's great, Formik's great, but now let's play our game with hooks. So in the new Formik 2, you can use field, because that's awesome. And so what this will do is using Formik's context, you'll be like, my input, props, and you'll be able to write get the field and the metadata around the field. Use field. We'll just pass it in all of our props, and I'll talk about that just in a second. And then we can return, like, let's just spread it on an input here. Props. Instead of my field, we'll use my input. And press refresh here. And look at that. We're using use field. Super sweet. So what this is doing is using React context to grab handle change, handle blur, and all the goodies that we need to wire up a field with Formik through React context. But even more fun is a lot of people would do this thing where they would build something like this. They'd use a field, and then there's an error message component, and they'd have this like sort of field set. In every app, if you've used Formik, you have like this whole folder of these custom inputs that you've probably built. Or maybe you built your own field because it wasn't flexible enough for your use case. Well, now with use field, you don't have this kind of problem because we give you back a meta prop, and this meta prop has that field's errors and touched initial values and all these goodies that you'd use if you're building this kind of like field set or this field input, this custom input right here. So what does that look like in practice? Let's go over to a checkbox example. Sorry. No, so we'll stay here for a second. So that's what that's looking in practice. And so what we can do is we can do meta.error, meta.touched, meta.error, and call that a day. And let's just drag this into schema validation here. So if we do sidebar. And we're going to schema validation. Nice, Palmer. Really doing a great job here. So let's see this. So now basically it should. We type and it's required, so there it is, the word required shows up. So this basically gives you access to like the field's metadata, and there's a bunch of docs on this, encourage you to read them. So now for like the moment we've been waiting for, while I'm gonna release Formik 2 for all of us, there's some other goodies that you should totally check out. But before I go into those, because this is gonna take a second, Ken, can I have my beer?
Sure can, bud.
Okay, cool. Let's, thank you. Hold on, thank you. So we're going to release Formik 2 right now. And as we do that, Formik NP. No, we got to check out master. I fucked this up. It's going to be like, no, you can't do that, guaranteed. Oh, it's sweet. Okay, hold on. I fucked this up. I'm supposed to do this before I ask for the beer. Hold on. Shoot. Okay. Shoot. Okay. Now I can't even get to the Explorer tab that I need to do. Okay. Damn it. The worst command ever, right? All right, I think that's good. I think we just lost all of our progress, so I'll get none of that. MP. If you don't use MP, you don't even know what's good. No commits found, previous release. Yeah, that's fine. We're going to do major. Actually, we're going to specify this version directly. We'll call it a patch, but it'll be a real patch. All right, it's a major. Don't worry about it. And we did this on the wrong thing. Let's put this over here. All right, blow this up. Can we see? Yeah. Okay. 2.01. I messed up the initial release like long ago, like 6 months ago, so we're going to 2.01. Just out of the bat. So Really should have shotgunned this. I don't know why I didn't. Oh, that was embarrassing. Oh, really should have shotgunned this. Wow, this really hurts. What a bitch. Yeah, so as this goes, 2.0 is launching. Ow. Ooh, I'm going to not be able to give the rest of this talk. Anyways, so 2.0 is out. You can check it out. There's a brand new tutorial that walks through all of the basics of Formik, thinking in Formik, yada, yada, yada. So let's see how this is going. I don't know that many tests. I'm not that good at testing, but anyways. So while this is going, I do want to talk a little bit about what I've learned over the past few years from Formik and sort of the adventure. And the first thing I learned is that solving for the 80% use case and sort of scratching your own itch, those are like the two biggest takeaways. So a lot of people come up to me and are like, Jared, a lot of open source stuff. How do I do that? Like, what was it? Was there a trick? Was there a secret? Like, how did you do it? And there really isn't a trick to it. The biggest thing biggest advice I would give to you is that, whether or not someone uses your tool is not very important. What's important is that you are solving your use case. And there we go. Formik 2.0 is published. Sweet. Woo. Update. So that's pretty sweet. Oh, now it's like, do it. Like, do this at React Advanced. Whatever, I don't need to spell it, just publish it, doesn't matter. Like, no one cares. What were we doing? Oh, yeah, this thing. So, sorry, folks. It's not that important. Someone at Lyft is like, oh my God, what is going on? No, builds are failing. Shit. What happened here? It's just ridiculous. All right, that's gone. So let's just go back to the slides because that got destroyed. So to summarize, what's new in Formik 2? Use field. I should really finish this. Use field. Use Formik. So a lot of people have been wanting to extend Formik or change its functionality, so use Formik is a way for you to do that. It's basically what we built in its entirety, and then Formik, the big capital F Formik component, composes that. So the component now calls the hook. There are no breaking changes with almost no breaking changes. It's so close to being no breaking changes that for the most part, unless you're doing crazy stuff, there's no breaking changes in Formik 2. So that's awesome. There are maybe one TypeScript error that you might run into. That's it. You can see the migration guide. Use Formik context is a very, very useful tool. So if you're building a custom component and you want access to all of Formik goodies, you can use Formik context. Get field props is great. This is a new addition to the Formik bag of props that lets you basically access use field, but directly. There is a couple of helpers, if you're into Formik, that allow you to initialize state differently. There's validation controls, and then these two new things are awesome that I would like to speak out for a second. So how many people here have played with Scheduler? No? I see no hands. Ken has, maybe. Maybe just Ken. All right, so if you haven't played with the Scheduler yet, of the React API, there's a new way to prioritize work in concurrent mode. And with the Scheduler, you can basically prioritize the most important type of work for your application and less important work. And this applies to Formik in a specific way. So when a user's typing really, really quickly, Formik 2 will de-optimize validation and ensure that updates to the component, the input, will be prioritized at the highest priority, and then validation or any extra CPU that's being used to run validation will be basically moved to a lower priority. And what that means is that as someone's typing super fast, validation is just going to be de-optimized for shortly until they're sort of done typing, and then magically React will finish up validation and show it at the right time. The way you can think about it is like an intelligent debounce. And this is only possible through concurrent mode and the scheduler. and it's an amazing, amazing feature. So yeah, you can validate form with low priority and validate form with high priority. Validate with high priority just like will block everything and do it like you'd normally think. It's completely backwards compatible, but low priority validation is really cool if you have very, very complicated like validation needs. Like let's say you're changing your username on Twitter and you're building that form where you want to do like that kind of like smart autocomplete that has validation, checking if the username exists or not. A great use case for validate with low priority. So this is like the quick gist. There's a migration guide in the repo. There'll be a blog post or 2 or 3 this weekend about Formik 2 as well. So just a quick recap of the roadmap. Formik 2 is also going to enable Formik Native, which I talked about it in React Native EU. So this is a special build of Formik that's purpose-built for React Native. There's going to be an addition of use field array. More docs are coming, more examples. We're going to make a huge push on accessibility. One of the things that I think React, again, is okay at is letting you build awesome stuff, but it's not super awesome at like making sure that that awesome stuff is accessible. So we'll be adding some accessibility helpers. And then we're going to rewrite Formik again, which is fun. Spent the last year doing that. So if you're not familiar with React Flare, React's going to redo its event system again. But it hasn't been updated since 2015, and it's really great. If you haven't seen it, check out the React core repo, and you can look at React Flare. It's React's attempt to unify the event system between React Native and React DOM, and that's going to be great if you're like React Native Web. But if you're Formik, it actually means that there's going to be tons of performance enhancements around input handling. So I'll be looking forward to doing that. And so I hope today you got a sense of like 1, forms in React, 2, how to build your own Formik a little bit, and 3, that you should probably use Formik. So if you haven't done so already, install Formik in your application. It'll make your life easier, probably make your coworkers' lives easier. And yeah, that's that. So thanks again. My name is Jared Palmer. Say hi. Don't be shy. Thank you all. You guys are awesome. Thank you, React Advanced.